Okay, good morning, everybody. We're really going to try to start on time. I know Peacebuilding is not the most punctual. I had to tell General Zinni yesterday that we're not the military. We don't run on very punctual time, but we have such a packed agenda that I would really like for us to try to start on time today. So I know there's more people coming in. This isn't USIP. You can bring in food and drink, so feel free, put your feet up. There are so many chairs over here that are empty, so please feel free to come in and move up to the front. There's reserved seats, I think, for, Laura, what are the reserved seats for? What? Oh, board, yeah. What? So, good morning, everybody. If you were at yesterday's event at USIP, welcome back. If this is your first day at the conference, we are so happy you're here. Also, remember, if you want to expand the conversation on social media, please use hashtag PeaceCon 2018. I'd like to start off and talk a little bit about our scholarship recipients this year that was sponsored by the Humanity United. We have about 10 that we have brought from all over the world. They are incredible young peace builders doing incredible work. They have blue ribbons on their name tags. If you see them, please say hello and introduce yourself to them. One thing I would like to talk about, though, is unfortunately one of our scholarship recipients from Haiti, his visa was denied. More importantly, we had more than 30 visas denied of people coming from overseas. These are people who have traveled, they're peace builders, they're incredible people. So it's our loss. You know, we lost their knowledge and their expertise by them not being there. So when we think about closing the borders, remember what impact that also has on us as a field as well. I love our day at USIP. It's great, but I love this day even more. One, because you can bring in food and drink and no one's yelling at you, but also because it's a bit more informal. So I hope everybody embraces that and enjoys this day. Not that we love USIP, but this is just a bit more of an informal day. And it feels a little bit more like a family reunion. So I'd like to thank AFP staff that have been working tirelessly. Many of them are in the room, a lot of them are still out there. We have a lot of volunteers. We have our board members that are working with us, our senior fellows, our sponsors. I just can't tell you what it takes to put on this conference. And more importantly, all of you as well who come and share your expertise and you sit on the panels. We couldn't do this without everybody. So again, I can't thank everybody enough. Remember Event Mobi. Go on it. We are saving trees. You can have real-time updates. We will be giving you conference alerts. We are also doing the data collection, and you have a chance to win $350 if you complete the final event special survey by 2 p.m. on Friday. It's really important that we get this data on the sessions, also on the survey at the end. This data is really important. It shows what works, what didn't work, what you want to see. So please fill it out. And then, you know, who doesn't want to win $350, right? So also we have merchandise sales this year. And the slides will be showing what we're selling. Please keep your name badge tomorrow. For tomorrow, if you're joining us tomorrow, there's also a happy hour at the end of today that's right in this building. And it's on the 10th floor, and it's starting at 5:30. And it will be a big celebration where after our Tomorrow Peace Builders event and the awards we're giving, we'll also be honoring the amazing Melanie Greenberg, who is not here, obviously, up here because she took another position, and everyone keeps reminding me of that. So please don't mention that around me. It's, it's a little sore still. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Berg, our wonderful chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. You're terrific. And thank you all. 3 years ago, I challenged me and us to foster evaluation, case studies, leading to an evolving case statement for our field. And that's moving along nicely. Now I just thought for fun, maybe because Tony Zinni gave us a challenge, that I'd throw out 4 new challenges. First, I would like to propose that we have a working group on guidelines for annual organizational reports by your organizations and the Alliance. I'd love to see more realism in these reports. Sure, include reports of successes, but also areas where we are correcting our strategies. If we confess the latter, maybe people will believe the former more. Second, we are coming together as a community in advocacy and organizing campaigns. Now we need to come together more, I believe, in our work in the field. What are the best cases of collaboration? At the provincial and national levels, how are we best fostering effective local capacities and institutions for peace building? Building local capacities is the fundamental challenge and test for achieving SDG 16. And I believe, therefore, it is the most important challenge for our community in the coming years. I would like to see the funding community help us with that challenge, too. Third, last night, Chip House organized a good session on future publications in our field. I would really love to see a series of monographs on best practices by corporations intended for a corporate audience, best practices by clergy in fostering peace with religions and congregations intended for the religious community, best practices of teachers teaching nonviolence, and best practices of parents fostering nonviolent folks like, well, us. Fourth, yesterday many of us toured USIP's Peace Tech, and I couldn't get very much of a whole picture in the tour, so I think we should invite them to present to us and the public at large a short annual report on the state of tech for peace, just to keep us up to date. Speaking of up to date, the profession of curbing violence and seeking peace is actually pretty new. So hearing new perspectives on achieving peace remains and will remain really relevant for us. Hence this lecture series on the future of peace. Donna Hicks, based at Harvard's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, has a lot to say, and I'll be really short now. Dr. Hicks has extensive and continuing experience in conflict resolution, working in a great many of the world's hotspots on some of its hardest problems. A star of TED Talks and the BBC, her work is widely known, particularly with the recent publication of her book, Leading with Dignity. Another recently published book is entitled Identity, the Demand for Dignity and the Politics of Resentment. It's also by a famous author who I won't name as After All. What do you think? Is that this is the end of history? Wink, wink. That book was panned. It reminded me, in reading the reviews, of being at an archaeological site in northern Pakistan, and just as I was leaving, a little boy rushing up to my car and putting in my hand a clearly brand new little carving in stone, and he said, "Genuine fake, genuine fake." Donna's book is the real deal. So to me, what Dr. Hicks has researched and will tell you today is the antidote to careless, often heartless and self-defeating domestic and foreign policy, to the pejorative stereotyping of those with different views. So whether you work at the family level, the national level, or the global level, what you will hear, I believe, will be fundamentally important to you. We warmly welcome back to the Alliance one of our founders, Dr. Donna Hicks.
Thank you, Bob, and Liz, and Melanie, because it was Bob and Melanie who conspired to get me here at this wonderful gathering. And Liz, I do feel strongly that this is a family reunion. I look around and see people that I've known for my whole career in international conflict. So it is an absolute honor to be here addressing you, because many of you could be standing up here too, and that I had the good fortune to be chosen to give this talk this morning. It's a privilege. So thank you, Bob and Melanie and Liz and everyone else who's worked on making this happen. Well, so dignity and its essential role in resolving conflict. Many of you have done very similar work that I've done out of the program on international conflict analysis and resolution at Harvard. And what we would do was we would try to bring parties together who are struggling with intractable conflict for dialogue. And with Herbert Kellman, my mentor, and my colleagues, we would often be sitting at these negotiating tables with the most committed people. The negotiators on both sides were really desperate to search for peace, and were committed to try to come up with some kind of agreement that would help move the peace process along. And we'd be sitting at those tables and talking about the political issues that divided them, and it became really clear to me fairly quickly that there were actually two conversations taking place at these tables. The first conversation was about the political issues that divided them. They wanted to see if they couldn't come up with some kind of a way to compromise and to work together. But there was another conversation that was also taking place, and I always think about it as occurring under the table. And this other conversation was like an emotional hurricane. And it had no words. It had no words, but you could see the people sitting on both sides of the table. You could see how they would be getting so upset, so angry, and yet, they felt it was their job to be polite and not be angry, and not express that anger. But I thought, I would see it every dialogue that we did, every country, whether it was Sri Lanka, Colombia, Israel, Palestine, no matter where we were in the world trying to bring these, make this conversation happen, I would see that same emotional, hurricane run through these discussions. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I have a feeling we're having the wrong conversation here. I wanted to be able to address those emotional reactions that people were experiencing, and yet there was no language for it. And I remember one time talking with my colleagues about, well, how do we address this? Do we just say to the parties, when, there's a lot of emotional turbulence in this room. Can we have that discussion? Well, I can tell you, nobody wanted to talk about the emotional experiences they were having. They felt, this is all about the politics. Once we get the politics worked out, we're going to be fine. I wasn't convinced. So then we had some colleagues, I think see Susanna Badian back there, we had some colleagues who got together and researched and looked at and thought through the whole trauma literature and how, well, maybe we could use trauma as a way of, discussing this. Well, unfortunately, when I tried that, the parties didn't want to be considered traumatized. They didn't like that word either. So we were sort of back to square one, and one day I think I was sitting at a table, I believe it was in Sri Lanka, I'm not quite sure, but it doesn't matter because it could have been anywhere. I was sitting at a table, a negotiating table, and I remember thinking, I had a little epiphany. I remember thinking, I know what, if we were to put words to this nonverbal conversation that was taking place, I know what it would sound like. It would be something like, how dare you treat us this way? How dare you? Don't you see we're human beings? Can't you see we're suffering? And so that moment struck me that I said to myself, I know what we can use. I know the word that we could use, because this is about their dignity. It's about being treated as if you weren't even a human being. So once I got that word in my mind, I couldn't get it out of my head. And very long story short, I started researching this topic of dignity, and there were a couple of people doing some fascinating work on dignity. Evan Lindner, you probably all know her, and Linda Hartling in their organization, and the philosophers were having a heyday with this word. They were going back and forth with what it is, how to define it, a real analytical perspective on what dignity is. But I was interested in using dignity in a very practical way in order to reduce the suffering that I could see firsthand in every dialogue process that we did. And I really believed that this word had the gravitas, it had the weight that people would say, be able, I'm guessing at this point, right? I was guessing that maybe this word is the word we could use to try to have that discussion around the emotional upheaval that people were experiencing. So I'm leaving so much out of the story, but fast forward, I had an opportunity to try this out, and it was an opportunity with a conflict in Latin America, and I was greeted by the president. He was going to come and introduce me to this. It was actually the conflict between the Department of Defense and the civilian Department of Defense and the military. They had a terrible, terrible squabble, and it was in the press, and they needed somebody to come and mediate. And they said they wanted me to do a communication skills workshop with these two groups that couldn't get along, the military and the Department of Defense. And so when I thought communication skills, I thought, I don't think I'm going to get generals to learn how to make I statements. I don't think that's going to work. I just don't. As much as I love that work, I knew this wasn't going to be the answer. And so when the president came and introduced me, and my partner, Ambassador Jose Maria Argueta, was with me, he introduced us both, and then he turned to me and he said, Dr. Hicks, would you please just explain to my colleagues what you're going to be doing? What kind of a communications approach are you going to take? And so I said, Mr. President, with all due respect, I see the extent of the breakdown of the relationship in this room. I can see it now. And I said, I don't think a communication skills workshop is going to go deep enough. And I said, if you would be willing, I would really like to have a conversation about dignity. Because my experience all over the world is that underlying all of the political issues that divide these parties, underlying that, there is a deep set of dignity violations that have gone unaddressed. And I really believe that this deeper layer would be the way to talk about how to rebuild this relationship in this room. And he looked at me and he said, well, he was going to go just introduce us and then leave to do some other work. And when he heard that I wanted to take a dignity approach for 2 days working with them, he turned to his scheduler next to him and he said, cancel my meetings today. I'm staying for this workshop. Well, that was great. except this was the very first time I was trying this out. And I'm just praying that it's going to work and that this is going to. So anyway, again, a very long story short, some of the military guys were, when I walked into the room and were being interviewed, they were still on their cell phones, and I could see them rolling their eyes. And by the end of 2 days, it was just for the grace of God, that we were able to make this happen, and that it was effective. The dignity approach, which I'm going to share with you all the building blocks of today, it actually helped restore the relationship between these two parties. They were able to rebuild a new relationship based on an agreement to fundamental principles around dignity. And so this one general, who wouldn't even give me eye contact in the beginning, he came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "Donna, not only did you help us repair the relationship in this room, but I think more importantly, you saved my marriage." So it was at that point that I realized this dignity stuff, this is not just about international conflict. It's not just about people who can't sign on to a peace agreement. This is about all of us. This is about every single one of us. We all want to be treated with dignity. And I actually think that dignity is our highest common denominator, because we all yearn for it. And so I got so excited after that first intervention, and I just kept, working with the model, and I kept trying it out in different conflicts and in different regions of the world. And it was the kind of thing that the parties were, and they were so willing to do it that I had a hard time stopping them, because I would ask them to talk about times when their dignity had been violated, and everybody had a story, and they had stories about their ancestors and stories after story. And then, actually, the second session was to have them talk about a time when they violated somebody's dignity in the room. So it was this combination of, being able to express yourself and what happened, but also take responsibility when it was appropriate. So anyway, that's why dignity. And I came across this quote by John Nesbitt that I love: "The most exciting breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human." And so, what is this? I mean, what is this expanding concept of what it means to be human? Well, when I started writing my first book, which is, it's Dignity's Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, as I said, I looked everywhere in philosophy and with all of Evelyn Lindner's work, but I didn't find these practical answers that I wanted. I wanted to be able to use dignity. I wanted to be able to go work with people and tell them what dignity was and how it affects their lives. And so what I realized was something so fundamental, so core to the human experience. There really weren't anything. There wasn't any, practical guideline. There weren't practical guidelines for how to use this. So, and I think E.O. Wilson sums this up beautifully, and I just love his work, and I'm sure many of you have read it. He says, "We have to understand ourselves in the world, not just survive it." And so understanding what the role dignity plays in what it means to be human, I was like a pit bull. I mean, I took 7 years trying to develop this, what I call the dignity model, and to really try to get to the bottom, the core of what it means to be human. And basically, I'm telling you, there's a simple truth that I uncovered. The simple truth is that we all want to be treated with dignity, and when we're not, we suffer. On the other hand, when we are treated with dignity, it sets the stage for flourishing. So I'm thinking that this simple truth, all right, we get mistreated, we suffer. We get treated well, we flourish, we grow, and we develop. So what's the choice? So this is why I kept being fueled by these insights that I came across when I did my research. And this basically is a learning approach. My dignity model, I consider it a learning approach to healing and reconciling relationships in conflict, because there is so much that I uncovered in my research that told me about what it means to be human that isn't in any textbooks or any classroom, any curriculum up to that point. So I figured we have a huge knowledge gap here, and I think it needs to be addressed. And also what this does is it restores the complexity around what it means to be human. And I think you'll see in a minute what I mean by that. And you know, in our field, in the field of international conflict resolution and the related fields, we often talk about the need for common ground, right? We often talk about that. Well, I also think we have to go a step further. I think we also need to find higher ground. And I think dignity, an understanding of dignity and how it affects us as human beings takes us to that higher ground. So, all right, let's get concrete here. So what is dignity? What comes to mind? Anybody, just what do you think when you hear the word dignity? Respect. Respect is always the first. Yep. Recognition, yes, absolutely. Humanity. Participation, sure. Sorry? Support. Okay, so one of the things that I realized, again, going through all the philosophy literature, everything that was written so far about dignity, what I realized is if we want to make this a practical, usable concept, it has to be simple. It has to be something that we can explain to all the people we're working with, no matter where we're working. It has to be a simple, and the other thing is, because we're addressing these deep emotional upheavals and wounds to our dignity, it also has to be very clear. So I came up with a really simple definition, which is that our dignity is our inborn, inherent value and worth, and it's also addresses our inborn vulnerability. Now, the vulnerability piece, I think, is the piece that might be unique in this definition, because what I discovered is that not only are we born with, as part of our birthright, to have value and worth, but the vulnerability to having that value and worth questioned in us is also very deep inside us. Lots of people don't even know they have value and worth, people with whom I work, and my first job is to explain to them, we all have dignity, every single one of us. And so, and I do think it's different from respect, and I'll tell you in a minute why, but if you have any trouble seeing this, if you have any trouble believing that we all are born worthy, I love reminding us of these beautiful little creatures that come into our world and how precious they are, and how, if you look at them, my gosh, is there any question of whether or not they have value and worth? And in fact, I believe that we would easily say that these little ones are invaluable. They're priceless and irreplaceable. So what do we do with something that's invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable? We take care of it, we protect it, we nurture it, we love it. So, if you look at this little infant, you can see the tenderness that, I mean, even the father who's cradling this vulnerable child, yes, he's concerned about, not dropping the kid, and this child is obviously physically vulnerable, but the fact is this little one's dignity is equally as vulnerable. This little one's dignity needs to be nurtured, needs to be cared for, needs to be fed, and needs help with its growth and development. So I just wanted to add that vulnerability aspect. And, it was so interesting. I gave this talk out in Chicago once to a group of midwives, and I showed this picture, and they all got really excited, and I said, well, yeah, I mean, actually, all of you, what you do, your contribution to the world is that you deliver these little bundles of dignity every single day. This is your job, to deliver these bundles of dignity. And that's what they are, And if you think about how we react to these little ones, it turns us into mush. We become more tender. We become more soft. And I think, honestly, this is where we want to get back to. I think it's in our memories that, how precious our little ones are, but I think we have to turn to each other and look at each other and say, yeah, you're precious too. You know, we have to get back to this tenderness. And you know how we all had name tags? Well, if we were in an organization or our jobs, we'd also have pictures of us here on the, most of you probably go to work and have name tags with your picture on it. Well, I think we should put our baby pictures on these name tags to remind us of how adorable we are and how precious. So why is it different from respect? Well, I think it's different from respect because, well, in our business, I'm sure you all hear as much as I have that when these parties are in conflict, they demand respect. They demand to be treated with respect by the other side. Well, frankly, I would talk to them and I said, look, I think that's a bridge too far. I think what you need to do is demand to be treated with dignity because it's your birthright. The problem is you're being treated as if you're not worthy. And because I think that respect has to be earned. And so when you have dignity, you don't have to do anything. You're just born with it. Yes, you have to protect it and you have to. And by the way, we're all born with dignity, but we're not necessarily born knowing how to act like it. So this is the educational approach here that I'm taking. But with respect, we do have to do something. If I say I respect somebody, he or she has done something remarkable to extend my admiration to that person. So dignity, I think, it's the baseline. We should all be treating each other with dignity. Even if we don't agree, even if we're enemies, we should still treat each other with dignity. And I think we'd see a whole lot less conflict in the world if we got that point, if we really understood how important dignity was to everybody. So, and I also think with this little one, her bundle of dignity is, or he or she, I don't know what it is, but I think it's our job to liberate that dignity within these young people and within ourselves. This is the job of education, is to liberate our dignity. Okay. So I came across some fascinating research, some of you probably already know about, that really completely changed things for me in my understanding of what dignity is. And so the research was done out in UCLA with Matt Lieberman, you know Matt Lieberman's work, and Naomi Eisenberg. This was way back. This was back in the early 2000s. They did this research. And what they found was, well, first of all, they're neuroscientists, social neuroscientists. And what they did was they put people in fMRIs and brain scans, and they exposed them to different scenarios and watched for what part of the brain was illuminated during the watching of these scenarios. And so what they found was, in their first try, they exposed people to scenarios where someone had, for example, a broken arm, a physical injury. And what they showed, what it showed was that part of the brain that was illuminated was the primal limbic area, the amygdala, where one experiences pain and deep emotions, and it's part of one of the earliest parts of the brain that evolved in us. But that's not so surprising. We'd expect that. You know, you have a physical injury, it hurts, and then, of course, our pain center is going to be illuminated. But the interesting, the really fascinating, mind-bending finding that they came up with was that when dignity was violated, they put people through different scenarios. They call it scenarios that inflicted social pain. What they found out was that the same area of the brain was illuminated as if they were having a physical wound. So essentially, they share the same neural pathway when their dignity was violated. I mean, I'm sort of generalizing it and calling it when their dignity was violated and experiencing a physical wound. But if you think about it, when you get a physical injury, right? You break your arm. First thing you do is you go into an emergency room, the doctors put on this nice cast, everybody feels sorry for you. We get lots of sympathy when we have physical injuries or something physically goes wrong with us. People are just naturally empathic and sympathetic. But the other thing is, when we get a wound to our dignity, it's so humiliating and it's so demeaning that people don't even want to be that near you, right? It's an isolating experience. And we stockpile these dignity violations inside us because there's nowhere to go. There's no 911 call. There's no emergency room where you go in and get, oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, she's had a dignity violation. All right, send her into. It doesn't work that way. So something so deeply fundamental that we all share as human beings, and this reaction in our brain, and there's nowhere to really go with it. And I think it's worse, frankly. I think it's worse to have a wound to our dignity. Because when you have a physical wound, you don't get demeaned, you don't get diminished, you don't get humiliated in the process. So, I've taken this into the corporate world, and, they all say to me, oh, Donna, yeah, this dignity stuff is very nice, touchy-feely, this is great, but we like data, we like data-driven outcomes. We need to do I said, wait a minute, you want some data? I'll give you some data. We've got some data about what it looks like for a person to experience one of these wounds to his or her dignity. And it really stops the conversation. And I say, we have to pay attention to this. This is important, and we need to do something about it. So, it works. The other mind-blowing experience that I've had around dignity was when I worked with Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu in Northern Ireland in around 2006. We brought parties together there, the Northern Irish Catholics and Protestants together for reconciliation work, because as you well know, in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, but in 2006, there was still tension in Belfast in the communities. And so Desmond Tutu was asked to come in and do some encounters with the victims and perpetrators to see if we could take them through a process where the outcome would be some form of reconciliation. And the BBC filmed this, and it became a 3-part television series. So this was really, the stakes were high for this to be successful. But anyway, before we started, Desmond Tutu wanted to do a team building. He wanted to get to know us and to know me. And he said, so Donna, tell me about your dignity work. This is just fascinating to me. I mean, that was why I was chosen to be a co-facilitator with him, was because of the dignity work. And I said, yeah, well, I've been working in international conflicts for a couple of decades now, and it really has become clear because the parties have all said to me, this conflict has stripped us of our dignity. We're stripped of our dignity, and we're fighting to get that dignity back. And Desmond Tutu looked at me, scrunched up his face, and he said, what are you talking about? He's like scolding me. I said, what? What did I say? And he said, you're telling people that they can have their dignity stripped from them? I said, well, I'm just repeating what they said. What did I do wrong? And he said, don't ever perpetuate that myth, he said. How do you think we got through apartheid? How do you think we survived all of those years of being treated as less than and being demeaned? He said the only thing that got us through was knowing we had our dignity in our hands and that nobody could take it away from us. And so I said, oh, of course, of course. And I said, look, I promise, I will never say that word again. I will never say that we can have our dignity stripped. And he said, you tell every audience you speak to, you tell them, nobody can take away their dignity. I said, okay, I promise. So from that moment on, I realized that this was part of the work, was just convincing people that nobody could strip their dignity. Now, on the other hand, he feels very strongly, that those dignity injuries need to be healed. They need to be addressed. It's not like you just, pretend just because I have dignity, it doesn't mean that my wounds aren't real. They are real, and they need to be healed. And so the last thing Tutu said to me was, go read Nelson Mandela's book when you get home, Long Walk to Freedom. Just go read that, and you'll know exactly. You'll find where Nelson Mandela talks about this. So, of course, I did that. And in the book, and sort of in the beginning of the book, he talks about what he and his fellow political prisoners did when they first got into Robben Island. And because he said, well, we had to figure out how to work with the guards in order to survive. And so he said in the book, he wrote that, well, it didn't take very long to figure out what the guards were up to. They tried to strip us of our dignity. And so he said, I was relieved because I knew that nobody was ever going to win that battle over my dignity, because I am not willing to part with it for any price or for any institution or for any man. So, okay, that's what I needed. You know, that was the, okay, I underscored this, yes, 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 I agree. And I'm never going to perpetuate that. So if you think about what this man endured when he, after he got, I mean, what he endured, certainly, the indignities that he endured, but also the joyfulness that he actually, this was, you know, this was when he first got out of Robben Island 27 years later. He still had that joyfulness. He still had that sense of centeredness around his dignity. And if you think about dignity in these terms, in that how resilient it can make us, how we can bounce back from being treated as if we've been, you know, so badly and humiliated. And so I think it's just a very powerful source of resilience. And I think of it also as the emotional scaffolding we need to navigate the world. Because let's face it, the world is a very hard place to, you know, to live with dignity. It's not, it doesn't come naturally. In fact, what happens naturally is that our dignity is, you know, we know indignity more than we know dignity. And I think, frankly, I think we're suffering, not only here in the United States, but everywhere I go out of the country and give these talks, everyone thinks that, you know, we are suffering from a global epidemic of indignity. And it is our job. I mean, those of us in this room who work tirelessly, all of you have done this. I'm sure you've done some form of this work already. You might not be using the same language that I'm using, but I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about. And all of you have worked with this too. I'm just trying to give you my take on what a practical approach would be. So, but yeah, I think we're suffering from a global epidemic of indignity. And we have our hands full. We definitely have our hands full. All right, so let's get really concrete here. So I did interviews with people from all over the world and asked them to tell me about a time when their dignity was violated and how they would have wanted to be treated under those circumstances. And I came up with 10, these patterns emerged in my interviews. And people, no matter where we were in the world, people all wanted very similar things. Now, the context, given the culture, differences in culture, the stories were, you know, were manifest, the indignities manifest themselves in different ways, but at the end of the day, the emotional experience was all the same, the emotional reactions. And to what? Well, what did people want? People wanted their identity accepted, no matter their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their you know, their sexual orientation. People want to be treated equally and wanted their identity to be honored. People wanted recognition of their unique qualities and ways of life. Part of the work that I did in Sri Lanka was that the whole Hindu community, the Tamil community, felt like their language, their religion, everything was not part of the Constitution, and so they wanted that recognition. Acknowledgement. Well, I said to Archbishop Tutu, after we were through, and I said, look, because we had some remarkable reconciliations in that Facing the Truth program, and I said to him, what do you think, what is like the key ingredient here for reconciliation? And he stopped and he thought about that question for a while, and then he said, well, you know, Donna, and I'm quoting him, I love his words. He said, you know, when people have been roughed up, we need acknowledgement for the suffering that we've endured. And he said, no matter what you do, if you create situations for people to be able to talk about what happened to them and to tell their story and to acknowledge that what happened to you was wrong. Because he said, what happens, he said in his experience, people often feel so bad when they have their dignity violated, but what they need to know is that they're not bad, something bad happened to them. And he thinks that that just slight externalization, getting some distance between who you are and what happened to you is a critical aspect of reconciliation. And of course, all the rest of these, you know these: inclusion, safety, fairness, independence. People want to be understood. They want to be given the benefit of the doubt. They want an apology when something bad happens to them. And let me just tell you an interesting story. When I went into the corporate world, I would interview people and ask them, all right, so tell me about, a time, or tell me of these 10 elements of dignity, what do you think, in which ways are you most violated in this work environment? And do you want to guess which element they chose? Does anybody want to take a wild guess? What? Recognition. What did you say? Acknowledgement? I'm sorry. Accountability. Yeah, well. You know what? I mean, I was shocked. 80% of the people I interviewed said the most violated element was safety. Now, it's not safety, physical safety. It's feeling safe to speak up when something bad happens to them. They don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can go to their boss and say, gee, what you just did was a real violation of my dignity. And I said, oh my gosh, we've got to figure out how to do this. We have to figure out how you can do this, how you can go approach your boss. And they said, what, are you crazy? This is career suicide. Don't ask me to go to my boss. He said, I'll get a bad performance review, or I might not get that promotion. No way am I going to rock the boat there. So what ends up happening is that these work environments become fraught with dignity violations, right? They seethe with dignity. And the culture implicitly, because nobody can feel safe to speak up, the culture actually supports that indignity. Anyway, I just thought that was such a fascinating finding. But here's the thing about these 10 elements of dignity. I think these are guidelines and expectations for what we want in our relationships. This is what we want. And when we have these 10 elements all figured out and we end up practicing these, what happens is relationships do flourish. Because when people have their dignity violated, it's not just the individual who suffers, but it's the relationship that breaks down too. So it's a double whammy here. And, but honestly, if you want to get rid of a relationship, all you have to do is just one of these. Violate one of these and you'll be done. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. And honestly, when I work with people about having them tell their stories about when their dignity is violated, almost always, every single one of these elements is involved in that massive violation that they experience. So part of the process, of course, is to get people to recognize, what was it that was unfair about the way I was treated? How was I singled out because of something in my identity? Or, how did I feel when I was excluded from that, from that meeting that I knew I should be at? And so being able to use this language to talk about what happened to people is definitely a way of distancing oneself from the assault and naming it. My colleague at Columbia, Kevin Oshner, has done this research that shows that when you name what happens to you, there is some externalization of the problem, and it becomes something that you deal with out there rather than you deal with inside. Because the whole idea is to clear up that inner space so that our dignity can be liberated, so that our dignity can flourish. So I think these are rules of engagement, and you can imagine working with international conflict processes with this, having our parties agree to these set of principles, these ways of honoring dignity, because it can be used not only to understand what the problem is, but it can also be used to promote the solution as well. And the other thing is, I like to think about these elements of dignity as triggers to connection and triggers to disconnection. They're triggers to connection. If we honor them, our relationships get stronger, but they can disconnect a relationship in a nanosecond, even with one small violation, as I said. So, all right, I have to tell you this story because this is the third thing that completely rocked my world when in thinking about how to use this dignity model. I teach a class at Columbia, and in this class, Columbia is great. They allow people who graduated 10 years ago to come and take these 3-day modules that take place over the weekend. So in my class this one semester, I had mostly graduate students who were interested in conflict resolution, but I also had a woman, older woman. She was significantly older than the young graduate students, and she was an HR executive, very high-powered job in New York, HR executive, and she was getting her PhD from Columbia also, and she had gone back to school. So we're all having a really great conversation in the first session of the class, and the students are loving this, because you can imagine these students are so ready and willing to talk about these things, but this one woman, she didn't say a word. And I'm thinking, ooh, why isn't she engaged here? And so I made a mental note. I'm going to go talk to her after, during the break. I'm going to see what's going on with her. So it was about 2 minutes before I was about to take a break, and all of a sudden her hand goes up. I said, oh, good, good. And she said, Donna, you might have noticed that I haven't really said anything. You might have noticed, right? And she said, yep, I'm sitting here, sitting with what you're telling us about our dignity, our individual dignity, and how we all have value and worth and everything. And she said, but Donna, and I love it. She said, I love what you're saying. And, she said, I think dignity is way bigger than you think it is. Ooh. Everybody's like, wow. We are just floored by that. And so we said, Davy, what do you tell us? What do you think? And she said, well, I think dignity was given to us in a sacred trust at birth. And she said, it is our duty as human beings. Oh, it makes me want to cry, actually. She said, it's our duty as human beings to be the guardians of that dignity. Not just the guardians of our own dignity, but the guardians of everybody's dignity, and also the guardian of the dignity of something far greater than ourselves. And in her thinking, that could be a higher power. That could be our, if you're a religious person, that could be our creator. If you're, just thinking like an environmentalist, it can be the dignity of the planet. Anyway, I was just shocked by that in such a wonderful way. It was like a bolt of electricity went through me. And I started thinking about it, and what does that really mean? So what does it really mean in terms of how to practically use this dignity framing? And so I ended up believing that dignity consciousness requires 3 things. 3 things: connection, connection, and connection. So what's the first connection? Well, the first connection is to our own dignity. I think we need to know really deeply, that we are born with inherent worth and nobody can take that from us. Again, that is our emotional scaffolding that helps us navigate the world. But I also think that the other connection is that we have to be connected to the dignity of others. If we've got it, everybody else has it. There's nothing unique about us. That's the difference between a narcissist and somebody who understands dignity from this perspective, because a narcissist only understands his or her own dignity. But you need to be connected to the dignity of others and the dignity of something greater than the self. And I see I now call these the 3 C's: connection, connection, connection. And if I go into an organization or I work with people, I use this as a diagnostic tool. Where do we need to do the work? The first connection: are people connected to their own dignity? Are they treating each other well? And do they have some greater purpose? You know, are they connected to something in their life that is a higher purpose? And what gives them meaning? Whether it's you know, in religious terms or whether it's in practical terms, in the sense that, I mean, working with millennials, most of my students are all millennials, and they want to do this kind of meaningful work. And they see that third connection and they say, yeah, this is really important. This is really important to us. We want meaningful work. We want a life of purpose. We want a life where we're contributing to the greater good. So here's the thing. When all three of these things are in alignment, I believe that this is when we experience fulfillment in our lives, when we have all of these three things lined up. Now, I gave this talk in at Cape Cod this summer, and I was talking about these three things, and I said, I've come up with a new definition of ADD. And what I told them was, ADD is alienation and disconnection from dignity. And I mean, I was kind of joking about it, you know, but then this one pediatrician got up and said, these were all doctors, this one pediatrician got up and said, Donna, this is probably at the core of the ADD that we see in our kids, right? It probably has something to do with alienation and disconnection from their dignity. So, yeah, I think this is really where this alignment and also just having a recognition of the importance of being connected to the greater good. Doing something that contributes, doing something that makes the world a better place. And of course, you know, all of us have that third C pretty well intact, because the work that we're doing all over the globe and the work that you're doing is certainly, and our efforts for peace are certainly trying to create that greater good. All right, one last big thing I want to share. And that is that, oh God, this was so exciting to me. I explored the evolutionary biology literature when I wrote my first book. And the evolutionary biology literature is very clear about one thing. We do not come into the world a blank slate. That in terms of our internal brain functioning, that we have what E.O. Wilson calls internal architecture that sets us up for behaviors and instincts that get triggered in a nanosecond when we experience threat. And so, you know, the conflicts we all work on, it's all about, you know, trying to manage threat, right? And so, okay, come on, there we go. So, long story short, again, I mean, you know, this is a whole course I teach, so you can see it's really hard to put it all into a 1-hour package, but what I ended up learning is that at this point, the threats that we experience as human beings are from each other. We are each other's predators, and we can trigger each other into violent action very, very quickly. So, for example, one of the things that these evolutionary biologists and psychologists say is that we have a predisposition to react in these certain ways, and you all know about flight, fight, and freeze. That's common knowledge. But there are other ways that we have a really strong reaction when we experience threat. So when somebody comes at us and let's say violates our dignity, we take the bait. Our biology wants us to get even, to return the harm, to get justice, whatever that looks like, even if it's revenge. We save face. We have an instant reaction to saving face, and because we don't like looking bad in the eyes of others. That is the big impulse here, the evolutionary legacy, is that we don't like to look bad in the eyes of others, because what that meant back when these brain mechanisms evolved was, if we're different in some way and got pushed out of the group, then our safety was in jeopardy. So, I mean, all of these things, and I want to say, just going to pause on face saving for a second, because it's something that we all do. You know, when we make a mistake or we really goof up something, our instinct is to deny it, to cover it up, to maybe even lie. And we're seeing quite a bit of that now. And so, but this face-saving gesture, this impulse, this instinct that gets triggered, you know, it might try to save face, but it destroys relationships. Because people know, people know when somebody's lying. We just have an inner sense about that. And eventually the truth comes out, right? Eventually. I think the process was just fascinating with the Saudi experience with a journalist, because in the beginning they denied, and now today I saw in the newspaper that they admitted that it was premeditated. So they went through a process. And this is all about saving face, and all about not wanting to lose status, and all about protecting a self that is, causing harm to people. But anyway, I want to just move on because I know I only have 5 minutes. Thank you, Sam. But these things cluster together. We resist feedback. We don't like it when people tell us we need to change something. Blame and shame others to deflect our guilt. And gossiping, this is really a fascinating one. So quickly, the reason gossiping feels so natural to us, and it's nice to get a good juicy story, isn't it? We love that. But it's not very dignified when we spread gossip around. I went into an organization who had a bad gossiping problem. That's why they hired me to go in and address the gossip. And you know what was the problem? The problem is people didn't feel safe to speak up, right? And so that energy of the negative dignity violation has to go somewhere, so it goes into the gossip mill. Liz tells one person, then Liz tells Bob, and Bob tells Sam, and it's like, it's over. Everybody knows what happened to Liz, except, let's say I'm the perpetrator, except for me, the one who did it, right? Because everybody knows. It's not very dignified. Anyway, these temptations to violate our own dignity, the biggest casualty of falling for these impulses and not learning how to restrain ourselves, the biggest casualty is the truth. It's the biggest, right? Yeah, he agrees. Okay, great. Because, and here's the thing, and people say to me, oh, Donna, you're asking us to hold back these instincts and not violate. I said, yes, that's exactly what I'm asking us to learn to do, is to restrain ourselves when we feel these instincts coming on, and we know we're going to do something that violates not only our own dignity, but somebody else's dignity. And so he said, you're asking us to be so vulnerable. And I said, yep, because vulnerability is where the truth lies. That's where you find the truth, is when you make yourself vulnerable. And what we have to do in order to learn this stuff is to take the shame out of it. Because it feels so shameful to admit we might have covered up or deceived and all that. Okay, but here's the thing. We're all hung up in the self-preservation instincts, but what if the self we're preserving is in desperate need of change? Right? What if it's in desperate need of change? Okay, good news to end this with. I also read in the evolutionary biology literature that we are wired also for empathy. We have, neurons in our brain that help us feel with other people. And honestly, E.O. Wilson thinks that what we need to do is to get back to this natural empathy that we are all born with. And he thinks it's the only answer. He thinks it's the only answer is to try to rekindle empathy. And I think that the way to do that, the way to rekindle that empathy, is through honoring dignity. Even if you're upset with a person, if you could get to the point where you can, acknowledge maybe the harm that you have done, or be held accountable for, say you're sorry. Because, E.O. Wilson says, look, here is the essence of the human condition. On one hand, we're wired for self-preservation. On the other hand, we're wired for love and connection. We want to feel with other people. We want to be connected with other people. It's just that too is part of our birthright, is to be connected and experience love in that way. And he said, if you think that your internal struggles are anything unique to you, forget about it. It's about what it means to be human. And so at the end of the day here, we're down to this question. What do we want more of? Do we want more human connection? Or do we want to engage in all that self-preservation and, all those instincts that try to make us look good even when we look bad? So, as I'm going to repeat what E.O. Wilson said, that, our job is not just to survive the world, but to understand it and to understand ourselves. And I think dignity shows us the way. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. This morning when,
Was I going to do a Q&A?
Oh, are you going to do a Q&A?
Do we have time?
We don't have time.
Okay,
Sorry. But you will be out, there's a break, and I'm sure you'll be swarmed with people for Q&A. I told her this morning when I saw her outside that I'm sure people will be, I know people will be swarming you for questions, and also this talk couldn't have been more important today. What's going on in the world, and it's not lost on us that bombs were sent to political leaders in our country, those who have spoken out in the U.S. So this couldn't be more relevant and important. So with that, we're going to take a break. I think they're going to be breaking down this room, is that correct? So people need to go out in the foyer. And please talk to Donna. I'm sure there'll be many questions. Thank you so much.